The sun filters through the leaves of Patterson Park, dappling the path with soft patches of light. It's the kind of morning that feels like a reprieve, calm, unassuming, ordinary. Derek Grant sits on a wooden bench near the duck pond, his elbows resting on his knees, sipping coffee from a paper cup. The breeze carries the faint scent of flowers from a nearby garden, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp ground left by an early drizzle. The park isn't busy, but it isn't empty either. A mother pushes her toddler in a stroller. A jogger loops around the pond for what must be the third time, her face flushed with effort. Derek watches a pair of ducks glide across the water, their ripples breaking the surface like tiny waves. It's his first real day off in weeks. Being a cop isn't a job you clock out of easily, but today Derek is off duty and out of uniform. His usual navy blue patrol gear has been replaced with a casual gray hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers scuffed from years of wear. But the one thing that stands out, the one thing that practically announces itself, is the red cap perched on his head. "Make America Great Again," it reads, the stitching crisp and bold. For Derek, the hat isn't about starting a fight. He didn't wake up this morning thinking about politics or headlines or culture wars. He wore it because he believes in what it represents, or at least his version of what it represents: hard work, tradition, pride in the country. He tilts his head back, feeling the sun on his face, and lets out a slow, contented sigh. That's when it begins. "Are you kidding me right now?" The voice snaps through the air, sharp and cutting. Derek looks up, startled. A woman stands a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. She's in her mid-30s, dressed in a purple tank top and black leggings, her running shoes dusted with dirt from the trail. Her dark ponytail sways as she shifts her weight, glaring at him with the intensity of someone who's been holding back for far too long. Derek blinks. Sorry? Sorry? Sorry?" She throws up her hands, her voice rising. "You're sitting here in public wearing that—" She points to his hat like it's a live grenade. "And you think it's fine?" Derek straightens, setting his coffee down on the bench. "I'm just sitting here minding my business," he says evenly. "What's the problem?" "What's the problem?" she echoes, incredulous. "That hat is the problem. Do you even understand what it represents? Or are you just another one of those—" She stops herself, biting off the rest of the sentence, but the accusation hangs in the air. Derek exhales through his nose. He can feel the tension creeping into his shoulders, but he keeps his voice calm. "It's just a hat, ma'am. I'm not hurting anyone." "It's not just a hat," she snaps, stepping closer. "It's a symbol of oppression, of hate, of everything wrong with this country. And you—" She gestures to him, her eyes narrowing. "You're a cop, aren't you? Wearing that in public? What kind of message are you trying to send?" The word hits like a slap. Cop? She's already decided who he is, what he stands for. Derek shifts on the bench, his gaze steady. "I'm not on duty," he says. "I'm just a guy in a park." "Oh, please," she scoffs, loud enough to draw the attention of a couple walking their dog nearby. The woman lowers her voice, but her tone loses none of its venom. "You think you can separate yourself from your job? You're a public servant. People look at you and see authority. And then they see that—" She points again at his hat, her finger trembling. "And they know exactly where you stand." Derek doesn't respond right away. He takes a slow breath, keeping his expression neutral. He knows what she's trying to do. She wants him to snap, to yell, to give her the ammunition she needs to prove her point. But he won't give her that satisfaction. "Look," he says finally, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to argue. I came here to relax. You don't like my hat? Fine. Walk away. But I'm not going anywhere." Her jaw tightens, and for a moment she looks like she might scream, but instead she steps back, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "You think you can just sit there, smug and comfortable, like you're untouchable. People like you think you own the world. But you don't. You're just another coward hiding behind a symbol." The words land harder than he expects. Coward. Derek's grip on the coffee cup tightens, the paper crinkling under his fingers. "You don't know anything about me," he says, his voice lower now. Oh, I know enough. She crosses her arms, her glare never wavering. You're just another bully who doesn't care about anyone but himself. From the corner of his eye, Derek notices a small crowd starting to gather. A jogger slows down, pulling out her earbuds. An older couple stops a few feet away, their heads tilted as they try to catch the conversation. Even the mother with the stroller has paused, her child babbling in the seat as she watches from a distance. Derek can feel their eyes on him, the weight of their judgment pressing down like a lead blanket. But he won't back down. Not here. Not over this. "Ma'am," he says, his voice measured, "I'm not the one making a scene. If you have a problem with me sitting here, that's on you. But I'm not leaving." Her eyes narrow to slits. "Oh, you think you're so brave, don't you? Sitting there with your coffee and your stupid hat pretending you're not part of the problem?" "I don't pretend anything," Derek says, standing now. He towers over her by a good 6 inches, but he keeps his posture relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. "I don't hide who I am, and I don't hide what I believe. That doesn't make me a problem." "Doesn't it?" she fires back, her voice shaking now, not with fear, but with rage. "Do you have any idea what people like you have done to this country, to people like me?" Her voice breaks slightly at the end, and for the first time Derek notices something beyond anger in her eyes, a flicker of something raw, something personal. He doesn't say anything right away, letting the weight of her words settle in the air. "What do you mean by people like me?" he asks, his tone even but probing. She throws up her hands, her frustration bubbling over. "You know exactly what I mean. People who support," she points at his hat again, like it's a banner for everything she despises. "People who think it's okay to dismiss, ignore, and silence anyone who doesn't look or think like you." Derek's patience is wearing thin, but he keeps his voice steady. "I don't dismiss anyone, and I don't ignore anyone. You're the one making assumptions about me because of a hat." "Assumptions?" She laughs bitterly, the sound harsh and sharp. "Oh, please, you're wearing a Maga hat. That's not just a hat. It's a statement. It tells me everything I need to know about you." Derek folds his arms, his gaze unwavering. "And what's that, exactly?" "That you're selfish, that you don't care about anyone who doesn't fit into your perfect little vision of the world, that you're okay with people being hurt, left out, stepped on, as long as it benefits you." Her words hit hard, but Derek doesn't flinch. Instead, he leans forward slightly, his voice low and firm. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've seen, what I've done, or why I wear this hat. You've decided who I am based on one thing, and you're using it to justify yelling at a stranger in a park." The crowd around them has grown. A teenager in a hoodie leans against a tree, watching with interest. A woman with a yoga mat tucked under her arm stands a few steps away, her phone raised like she's recording. Even the jogger has stopped completely now, her hands on her hips as she catches her breath and takes in the scene. Karen, he still doesn't know her real name, but she has all the hallmarks of the archetypal Karen in his mind, glances around, noticing the onlookers for the first time. Her shoulders stiffen, but instead of backing down, she seems to double down. "You think you can hide behind your badge?" she says, her voice rising again. "You think because you're a cop, you're untouchable? That no one's allowed to call you out when you're wrong?" "I'm not hiding behind anything," Derek replies, his tone sharper now, "and I'm not wearing this hat to offend anyone. I'm wearing it because it means something to me. If you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine." "It's everyone's problem," she snaps. "Do you even know what that hat represents to people like me? To people who've been pushed aside, ignored, attacked?" Her voice cracks again, and Derek sees that flicker of vulnerability return, stronger this time. He doesn't interrupt, waiting for her to finish. "Do you even care?" she demands, her voice trembling. "Or is it just easier to pretend it doesn't matter?" For a moment, the anger in Derek's chest softens, replaced by something heavier, something harder to ignore. He doesn't know what she's been through, and he won't pretend to. But he also won't let her paint him as the villain without knowing his story. "You think I don't care?" he says quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I care more than you know. I've spent 15 years on the force, walking into situations you can't even imagine. I've seen people at their worst, and I've done everything I can to help them, no matter who they are or where they come from. He takes a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. Do you have any idea how many times I've put myself in danger for people I've never met? People who didn't care if I went home to my family at the end of the day? I don't wear this hat because I want to hurt anyone. I wear it because I believe in what this country can be, not what it is, what it can be. And if you don't agree with that, fine. But don't you dare stand there and tell me I don't care. The words hang in the air, heavy and unrelenting. The crowd is completely silent now, their attention riveted on the two of them. Karen opens her mouth like she's about to respond, but no words come out. For the first time, she looks uncertain, her anger faltering under the weight of his conviction. But then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rings out. She's right, though. That hat does represent hate. Derek turns, his eyes narrowing as a young man steps forward. He's in his 20s, wearing ripped jeans and a graphic t-shirt, his hair dyed electric blue. His expression is defiant, his arms crossed over his chest. You can say it means whatever you want, the young man continues, but to a lot of people, it's a symbol of everything wrong with this country. You don't get to decide how other people feel about it. Derek exhales slowly, his frustration mounting. I'm not trying to decide how anyone feels. I'm just living my life. Yeah, well, your life makes other people's lives harder, the young man shoots back. And how exactly am I doing that by sitting on a bench? Derek asks, his voice edged with disbelief. The young man hesitates, but Karen steps in, her voice gaining strength again. Because it's not about the bench. It's about what you're choosing to represent. You think it's harmless, but it's not. It's a slap in the face to people who've been hurt by everything that hat stands for. Derek feels the familiar burn of frustration creeping back into his chest, but before he can respond, an older man steps out of the crowd. He's in his 60s, with a weathered face and a faded baseball cap that reads, Vietnam Veteran. That's enough, the older man says, his voice calm but commanding. He looks at Karen, then at the young man, and finally at Derek. You're all yelling at each other like a bunch of kids. You think you're going to solve anything by shouting in a park? Karen bristles. We're not shouting. You're making a scene, the man interrupts, his tone leaving no room for argument. And for what? A hat? You're wasting your breath. He turns to Derek, his gaze steady. You've got a right to wear that hat, son, and they've got a right to dislike it. But none of you are doing yourselves any favors by acting like this. Derek nods subtly to the older man, acknowledging his words, but he doesn't sit back down. His heart is pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of holding back everything he wants to say. Still, he won't let the tension push him into something reckless. Not here, not now. Karen, however, doesn't seem ready to let the moment go. She turns on the older man, her hands gesturing wildly. You're just going to defend him? You, of all people, a veteran? Don't you see what that hat stands for? Don't you care about the people it hurts? The older man raises an eyebrow, unfazed. I didn't say I liked the hat, he says plainly. I said he's got a right to wear it. That's what I fought for. Freedom, not agreement. You don't have to like it, and you don't have to stay here arguing about it either. Karen's lips tighten into a thin line, but she doesn't respond. The young man with the electric blue hair steps closer, clearly emboldened by her earlier words. It's easy for you to say that, he says to the older man. You're not the one who has to live with what that hat represents. The veteran looks at him sharply, his eyes narrowing. You think I don't know what hate looks like? You think I haven't seen the worst of people? I've seen things you can't even imagine, son. And I'll tell you this, if you spend your life letting a piece of fabric dictate how you feel, you're letting them win. The young man recoils slightly, caught off guard by the man's bluntness. Derek decides it's time to step in again. He takes a small step forward, his hands outstretched in a gesture of calm. "Look," he says, his voice measured, "I get it. You don't like the hat. You don't like what you think it stands for. But it's not a weapon, and it's not an attack on you. It's my belief, and I'm not forcing it on anyone." Karen shakes her head, her expression somewhere between anger and disbelief. "It's not that simple. You're pretending like it's just a personal choice, but it's more than that. It's a statement. It's a declaration that you don't care about what people like me have been through." "Then explain it to me," Derek says suddenly, his voice firm but not unkind. The words seem to catch her off guard, and he presses on. "Tell me what you've been through. Help me understand why this hat bothers you so much. I'm not saying I'll agree, but I'll listen. Isn't that what you want?" The crowd seems to hold its breath, the tension palpable. Karen hesitates, her eyes darting between Derek and the faces of the onlookers. For a moment, it looks like she might refuse, but then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she begins to speak. "My brother," she says, her voice low but steady, "my little brother, Michael. He was a good kid, smart, funny, kind. He wanted to go into environmental law. He said he wanted to save the world." She pauses, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. Derek watches her closely, his expression unreadable. "He was gay," she continues, her voice trembling now, "and he was proud of who he was. But not everyone in our town saw it that way. He got bullied, pushed around, called names, even beaten up once. And you know what happened when we went to the cops?" Derek doesn't respond. He waits, sensing there's more. "Nothing," she says bitterly. "They said boys will be boys. They said he should toughen up, learn to stand up for himself. They didn't care. They didn't protect him. And when he took his own life, they didn't care about that either." Her voice cracks, and she looks away, blinking rapidly. The crowd is completely silent now, the air heavy with her words. "So yeah," she says after a moment, turning back to Derek. Her eyes are red, but her glare is just as sharp. "When I see someone like you wearing that hat, I think about all the people who didn't care. I think about the people who looked at my brother and decided he wasn't worth protecting. And I wonder if you're one of them." Derek feels the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He doesn't know what to say at first, the weight of her story settling over him. But he knows he has to say something. "I'm sorry about your brother," he says quietly. "I can't imagine what you've been through, and I won't pretend to. But I need you to know this. What happened to him, it wasn't right, it wasn't fair. And it wasn't because of me or this hat." Karen shakes her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "You don't get it. You're part of the same system that failed him. You stand for the same things that let him fall through the cracks." "I don't stand for hate," Derek says, his voice steady. "I stand for law and order, for accountability. I became a cop because I wanted to help people, not hurt them. I can't change what happened to your brother, and I can't change what people think this hat means. But I can promise you this. I've never turned my back on someone who needed me, and I never will." The silence stretches between them, heavy and unbroken. Derek doesn't know if his words will make a difference, but he means every one of them. The older man with the veteran's cap clears his throat, breaking the tension. "Maybe it's time we all took a breath," he says. "This ain't the place to hash out the world's problems. Sometimes you gotta agree to disagree and move on." Karen wipes at her eyes, her expression conflicted. She looks at Derek, then at the crowd, and finally at the ground. She begins, but the words trail off. Derek watches her for a moment before nodding slowly. "I get it," he says. "You've got your reasons and I've got mine, but at the end of the day, we're just two people trying to make sense of a messy world." Karen doesn't respond immediately. Her gaze lingers on the ground, her posture rigid as though trying to keep herself together. The crowd around them has thinned slightly, but those still present are silent, waiting, watching for the next words to land like drops of rain before a storm. Derek doesn't move. His arms hang loose by his sides, his eyes steady on her, not pushing, not retreating. If she's going to speak, she'll do it on her terms. Finally, Karen exhales sharply, lifting her head. Her voice is quieter now, stripped of the edge it had before, though it's no less certain. Maybe you think we're just two people in a messy world, she says, but you don't see how people like you make it messier for people like me. Derek tilts his head slightly, his brows knitting together. People like me? Yes. She gestures toward him, her tone sharpening again. The ones who talk about tradition and values. Like it's some golden rule everyone has to follow. The ones who hide behind this a law and order crap, when what you really mean is, keep things comfortable for people who already have power. The words hit him harder than she probably realizes. Derek resists the urge to fire back, to push against her assumptions the way he might in a courtroom or interrogation room. Instead, he speaks slowly, carefully, his voice deliberate. I grew up in a town where the only traditions we had were working hard and helping your neighbor, he says. My dad was a welder who worked 6 days a week just to keep food on the table. My mom taught 2nd grade and spent half her paycheck buying supplies for her students because the school couldn't afford them. We didn't have power, Karen. We had each other. Karen flinches slightly at the use of her name. She hasn't told him who she is, but he knows the type. She doesn't deny it, though, and Derek presses on. When I became a cop, it wasn't about politics or power or whatever else you think. It was about making sure the people in my community were safe. I've pulled kids out of burning cars, broken up fights before they turned deadly, even delivered a baby in the back of a squad car once. None of those people cared about my politics. They cared that I showed up when they needed me. Karen opens her mouth to respond, but Derek cuts her off gently. So when you stand here and tell me I don't care, or that I'm part of some system that's out to hurt you, it pisses me off. Not because I hate you, but because you're wrong. You don't know me. A faint murmur ripples through the crowd, and for the first time, Karen seems to notice the people around her. She looks uncomfortable, glancing from face to face, her earlier confidence faltering. The young man with blue hair steps forward again, breaking the silence. It's easy to say you care, but what about the times you don't? What about the people who don't get your help because they don't fit your definition of good or deserving? Derek sighs, rubbing the back of his neck. You think every cop gets to pick and choose who they help? You think I look at someone and say, nah, not them? I've been spit on, cussed out, and called every name in the book by people I was trying to save. You think I stopped helping because of that? No, because it's not about me. It's about the job. Blue Hair scoffs, folding his arms. That's a nice little speech, but actions speak louder than words. How many times have you stood by while people like her brother, he nods toward Karen, got left behind? I wasn't there, Derek says simply, and I'm sorry for that, but I can't go back and fix it. All I can do is keep showing up for the people who need me now. Karen's face twists into something between a grimace and a sneer. You keep saying that like it's supposed to excuse everything else, like it's enough to just show up and say, I'm here. Look how good I am. It's not about being good, Derek says, his voice sharper now. It's about doing the work, and yeah, sometimes the system fails. Sometimes we fail. But if you think standing here yelling at me is going to fix that, you're kidding yourself. The words come out harder than he intended, but he doesn't regret them. He watches Karen's reaction carefully, waiting to see if she'll take a step back or push forward again. Suddenly, a woman's voice cuts through the tension. Why don't you both stop arguing and actually talk to each other? The crowd parts slightly, revealing the jogger who had been lingering on the sidelines. She steps forward, her ponytail damp with sweat and her expression exasperated. You're both so caught up in proving your points that you're not even listening. Karen turns to her, her jaw tightening. I am listening. I'm just not hearing anything worth agreeing with. The jogger shakes her head. No, you're hearing what you want to hear. So is he. But this isn't just about a hat or a job or even your brother. This is about the fact that no one wants to admit they might not have the whole story. The words hang in the air, and Derek feels a strange mix of irritation and relief. He doesn't know this woman, but she said what he's been thinking since the confrontation started. Karen crosses her arms again, her expression defensive. "What's your point?" "My point," the jogger says, "is that you're wasting energy attacking each other instead of figuring out what you can actually do to make things better." The silence that follows is thick with unspoken tension. Derek glances at Karen, expecting another sharp retort. But she surprises him. She exhales deeply, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of her anger is finally catching up with her. "What's the point?" she mutters, more to herself than anyone else. "What's the point of any of this?" Derek watches her carefully, his own irritation softening. He doesn't know what's running through her mind, but he sees the exhaustion in her posture, the way her hands tremble slightly as she rubs her arms. "Maybe," he says quietly, "the point is figuring out how to move forward without tearing each other apart." Karen looks up at Derek, her eyes sharp but no longer aflame. The fire in her gaze has dimmed, replaced by something harder to define, a mixture of frustration, resignation, and maybe even curiosity. For a moment, she looks like she might say something, but the words don't come. She shifts her weight, glancing at the jogger, then back at Derek, as if waiting for someone else to take the lead. The jogger breaks the silence. "Look, I'm not saying you two are going to walk away from this agreeing on everything, or anything for that matter. But standing here throwing punches with words isn't solving a damn thing. It's just making a scene." Karen bristles, crossing her arms again. "It's not just a scene, it's a statement. People like him need to understand." Derek cuts in before she can finish. His voice is calm, but there's an edge to it now. "People like me? You keep saying that, Karen, but you don't even know who I am. All you know is the hat I'm wearing, and you think that's the whole story." She freezes, the words hitting her with an almost physical force. "I could say the same thing about you," Derek continues, his tone measured but pointed. "You think you're making some grand statement, but all you're doing is yelling at someone who probably agrees with you more than you realize." Karen's eyebrows shoot up, her disbelief practically radiating off her. "Agree with me? You're kidding, right?" "I'm not," Derek says firmly. "Do I agree with every single thing you've said today? No. But do I think the system has failed people? Yes. Do I think there are things we can do better? Absolutely. You think because I'm a cop and I'm wearing this hat, I'm your enemy. But that's not the case, not even close." The tension in the air shifts, softening but not disappearing entirely. Karen doesn't respond right away, her expression flickering between anger and contemplation. The crowd is quieter now, some people beginning to drift away, sensing the climax of the confrontation has passed. The older man in the veteran's cap steps forward again, his voice breaking the stillness. "You know, you both might actually be saying the same thing if you stop shouting long enough to hear it." Derek glances at him, nodding subtly in agreement. Karen, however, narrows her eyes, her tone sharp. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're both fed up," the older man replies, his gaze steady. "Fed up with how things are, how people treat each other, how nobody seems to care anymore. You just have different ways of showing it." For a moment no one speaks. The jogger shifts on her feet, the faint creak of her sneakers against the gravel, the only sound. Derek watches Karen closely, waiting to see how she'll respond. "I'm tired," she says finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. Derek's posture softens. "Yeah," he says quietly. "Me too." Her head snaps up, her expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "You're tired of what? You've got the system on your side. You've got—" "Do I?" Derek interrupts, his voice calm but firm. "You think being a cop is easy these days? You think wearing this uniform makes me immune to criticism, to danger, to the same struggles everyone else faces? I don't get a free pass because of my job or this hat. If anything, it paints a target on my back." Karen hesitates, her brow furrowing. For the first time, Derek thinks she might actually be listening. "You're not wrong about everything," he admits, surprising even himself. There are things about the system that need to change. Things I see every day that make me question why I signed up for this in the first place. But I stay because I believe it can be better. I believe people can be better. That's why I wear this hat. Not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I believe we can do better if we're willing to put in the work. The crowd has thinned considerably now, only a handful of people remaining. The jogger finally shakes her head, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips. "This is probably the most civil yelling match I've ever witnessed," she says dryly. Derek chuckles, the sound breaking the tension like sunlight through clouds. Even Karen's lips twitch, though she doesn't quite smile. "I don't agree with you," she says, her tone softer now, but still firm. "I don't think I ever will, but—" She trails off, glancing down at the ground. "Maybe I was wrong about some things. Maybe not everything, but—" Derek nods, sensing the unspoken words. "That's all anyone can ask," he says. The veteran clears his throat, stepping forward one last time. "You know, I fought in a war that tore this country apart. We were divided then, just like we're divided now. But back then, at least we could agree on one thing, that we all wanted something better, even if we didn't know how to get there." He looks at both Derek and Karen, his gaze piercing. "Maybe it's time we remember that." Karen exhales deeply, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the confrontation began. "Maybe," she says quietly. Derek extends a hand toward her, his gesture simple but meaningful. She stares at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally reaching out to shake it. The tension dissipates, the moment shifting into something quieter, more reflective. The remaining bystanders begin to drift away, conversations murmuring into the background as the park returns to its usual rhythm. Derek sits back down on the bench, his coffee now stone cold, but he doesn't mind. Karen stands for a moment longer, watching him, before turning and walking away. She doesn't look back. As the sun dips lower in the sky, Derek adjusts the Maga hat on his head. The world hasn't changed, not really, but for the first time in a long time, he feels like there's a glimmer of something worth holding on to, a reminder that even in a divided world, there's still room for a conversation. Derek sits on the bench a moment longer, the weight of the conversation lingering in the air like the faint scent of rain after a storm. He watches Karen's figure grow smaller as she walks away, her steps deliberate, her shoulders still stiff with residual tension. He wonders what she's thinking. Maybe she's replaying the argument in her head, picking apart his words, convincing herself she was right. Or maybe, just maybe, she's considering the possibility that they weren't as far apart as she thought. The older man with the veteran's cap is still nearby, standing with his hands tucked into the pockets of his faded jeans. He's watching Derek, his expression thoughtful. "You handled that well," the man says finally, his voice low but firm. Derek glances up at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Not sure about that. Feels like I just threw gas on the fire." "Nah?" The man shakes his head, stepping closer. "You kept your cool, didn't let her drag you into something ugly. That's rare these days." Derek chuckles softly, the sound dry. "Guess it comes with the territory. You spend enough time diffusing situations, you learn not to light the fuse yourself." The man sits down on the other end of the bench, the wood creaking slightly under his weight. For a moment they sit in companionable silence, the hum of the park filling the space between them. "You know," the man says after a while, "I've worn a lot of hats in my day. Some people liked them, some didn't. But I never let the hat define me." He glances at Derek, his eyes sharp but kind. "Don't let it define you either." Derek nods slowly, mulling over the man's words. "I appreciate that," he says, "but it's hard not to feel like you're wearing a target sometimes. Seems like no matter what you do, someone's going to hate you for it." The man chuckles, a low, gravelly sound. "Welcome to life, son. You'll drive yourself crazy trying to please everyone. All you can do is stand by what you believe and hope it's enough." Derek leans back against the bench, his hands resting in his lap. The man's words resonate with him, a steady anchor in the turbulent sea of the day's events. "What about you?" Derek asks after a moment, curiosity getting the better of him. "What do you believe in?" The man exhales deeply, his gaze distant. "I believe in people," he says simply, "even when they let you down, even when they make you want to throw in the towel. I've seen what happens when you stop believing in them. It's not pretty." Derek nods, the weight of the words settling over him. He doesn't respond right away, letting the man's voice carry in the stillness. Across the pond, a family sets up a picnic, their laughter carrying faintly on the breeze. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, and the rhythmic creak of a swing set rises from the playground. Life goes on, indifferent to the conflicts and tensions that erupt and fade within its bounds. "Thanks for stepping in back there," Derek says eventually, glancing at the older man. "Not everyone would have done that." The man shrugs, his expression unreadable. "Didn't do it for you," he says. "Did it for the kid, for her brother?" Derek frowns slightly, caught off guard. "You didn't know him?" "Didn't have to," the man replies. "I've seen his story too many times before. Different names, different faces, same ending. If saying a few words can stop it from happening again, it's worth it." Derek is about to respond when he notices something out of the corner of his eye. Karen has stopped at the edge of the park, her back to him, her phone in her hand. She's not walking away, not really. She's lingering, hesitating, like she's unsure if she's ready to leave for good. "Looks like she's got something more to say," the older man observes, following Derek's gaze. "Maybe." Derek watches her for another moment, then sighs and stands. "Guess I'll find out." The man doesn't stop him, just nods and stays seated on the bench as Derek walks toward Karen. When he's a few feet away, she turns, startled. Her phone is still in her hand, but she lowers it, her expression guarded. "Hey," Derek says, stopping a respectful distance away. "You okay?" Karen's lips press into a thin line. "Why do you care?" "Because I do," Derek says simply. Her shoulders slump slightly, and for the first time she looks genuinely unsure of herself. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admits, her voice barely audible. I'm so tired of everything feeling like a fight. Like if I don't scream loud enough, no one will listen." Derek's chest tightens at the rawness in her voice. "Sometimes people don't need you to scream," he says gently. "Sometimes they just need you to talk." Karen looks at him, her eyes searching his face like she's trying to find something she's not sure exists. "And sometimes," Derek continues, "you don't have to convince them you're right. Sometimes it's enough just to let them know you care." Karen's gaze drops to the ground, and for a moment, Derek thinks she won't respond. But then she nods, just barely, like she's testing the motion. "I don't know if I can do that," she says quietly. "You can," Derek says. "It's not easy, but you can." Karen exhales slowly, tucking her phone into her pocket. She looks up at him again, her expression softer than before. "I don't know if this changes anything," she says. "Maybe it doesn't," Derek replies, "but it's a start." They stand there for a moment longer, the air between them lighter now, less charged. Then Karen nods again, turns, and walks away. This time she doesn't stop. Derek watches her go until she's out of sight, then turns and heads back toward the bench. The older man is still there, waiting, a faint smile on his face. "Well?" the man asks as Derek sits down. "Not sure," Derek says honestly, "but I think we might have reached some kind of middle ground." The man chuckles, the sound low and warm. "That's about as good as it gets these days." Derek smiles faintly, leaning back against the bench. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows across the park, but the air feels lighter somehow. And for the first time in a long time, Derek feels like maybe, just maybe, there's still hope for something better. By the time Derek leaves the park, the shadows are long and the first stars are beginning to peek through the darkening sky. He walks back to his car, the crunch of gravel under his sneakers a rhythmic counterpoint to his thoughts. Karen's words linger in his mind, not just the anger and accusations, but the vulnerability beneath them. He doesn't know if she'll ever see him as more than the man she argued with, the man in the red hat. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's enough that they spoke, that they listened, even if only a little. As he slides into the driver's seat, Derek adjusts his hat in the rearview mirror. The bright red fabric stands out starkly against the gray interior, a symbol of pride and controversy, of beliefs both personal and public. He takes a deep breath, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. The day's events have left him weary, but not defeated. For all the shouting and tension, he feels a strange sense of peace, a reminder that even in the middle of conflict, there's room for understanding, for connection, however small. Derek starts the engine and pulls out of the lot, the park fading into the distance behind him. The road ahead stretches long and open, the streetlights casting steady pools of light along the way, and as he drives, the Maga hat perched on his head, Derek holds on to one simple truth. The conversations that matter most are never easy, but they're always worth having,